September 16, 1992, 7 p.m. London. The phone rang in the British Treasury. The voice on the other end delivered news that would change economic history. "We've lost. Soros won." In the previous 24 hours, George Soros had made $1 billion betting against the British pound, the single most profitable trade in history. The British government had spent $27 billion trying to stop him. They failed. By midnight, Britain would crash out of the European exchange rate mechanism, the pound would collapse 15%, and Soros would become the man who broke the Bank of England. This is the story of how one hedge fund manager destroyed a currency, bankrupted a government, and walked away richer while an entire nation paid the price. George Soros wasn't born a billionaire. Born 1930 in Budapest, Hungary, son of a Jewish lawyer who taught him that survival meant understanding when systems were about to break. In 1944, Nazi Germany occupied Hungary. The Soros family obtained false papers identifying them as Christians. George, age 14, watched neighbors who trusted the system get deported to Auschwitz. His family, who bet against the system's stability, survived. This experience burned into him a singular philosophy. When you see a broken system, bet everything against it. After the war, Soros escaped to London, studied economics, graduated in 1952 with mediocre grades but exceptional ambition. In 1956, he moved to New York with $5,000 in savings. He worked as an arbitrage trader, learning something crucial. Markets aren't rational. They're driven by psychology and politics. Find the breaking point, and you could make a fortune. By 1969, Soros started his own hedge fund, Quantum Fund. His trading philosophy was ruthless. Find governments defending unsustainable positions, bet massive against them with leverage, force them to either spend all reserves fighting you or admit defeat. Either way, you win. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Soros refined his approach. He made millions betting against overvalued currencies, exploiting central bank mistakes, identifying economic imbalances before others saw them. His track record was extraordinary. Quantum Fund averaged 30% annual returns, turning $1,000 invested in 1969 into over $40,000 by 1990. But Soros wasn't satisfied with being rich. He wanted to prove his theory, that markets, not governments, ultimately control economic reality, that political decisions cannot override mathematical certainty. Britain's entry into the ERM would give him that chance. The setup for Soros's greatest trade began in 1990, with European politics overriding economics. After the Berlin Wall fell, Europe rushed toward integration. The European exchange rate mechanism, the ERM, was designed as a stepping stone to a single currency. Member countries would peg their currencies to each other within narrow bands. On paper, elegant. In practice, a disaster. The ERM required fundamentally different economies to maintain identical monetary policies. Germany had just reunified. To control inflation, Germany's central bank raised interest rates aggressively. Other ERM countries had to match them, or their currencies would break the peg. Britain joined the ERM in October 1990 at 2.95 German marks per British pound. Margaret Thatcher warned it was a mistake. The rate was too high. But her chancellor insisted Britain must be at the heart of Europe. By 1992, Britain was in recession. Unemployment rising, housing prices falling. But to stay in the ERM, Britain had to match Germany's high interest rates. By summer 1992, British rates were at 10%, strangling the economy. The pound, pegged artificially high, was a target painted on Britain's back. George Soros spent summer 1992 studying Britain's position. His analysis was brutal. Britain cannot maintain this peg without destroying its economy. The pound is overvalued by 10 to 15%. Britain will either devalue or crash out. Either way, shorting the pound makes a fortune. Soros called his chief strategist Stanley Druckenmiller. "How big a position can we take?" "We could go $10 billion short." Soros's response became legend. "Double it." Druckenmiller was stunned. Doubling meant betting nearly the entire Quantum Fund on a single trade. If Soros was wrong, they'd lose everything. But Soros had done the math. Britain's foreign reserves couldn't defend the peg indefinitely. The speculators had unlimited firepower. It wasn't a gamble. It was mathematics. By September, Soros had borrowed $15 billion worth of pounds. The trade: borrow pounds, sell them for marks, wait for the pound to collapse, buy back cheaper, return borrowed pounds, pocket the difference. But Soros wasn't alone. Other hedge funds piled on. Julian Robertson, Paul Tudor Jones, Bruce Kovner. Every major speculator smelled blood. By mid-September, $15 billion in speculative money was betting against the pound. The British Treasury realized they were under attack. Norman Lamont, the Chancellor, announced, "We will defend the pound at all costs. The speculators will lose." What Lamont didn't understand was the mathematics. Britain's reserves totaled $44 billion. The speculators had unlimited selling power. Britain was spending real money. Soros was spending borrowed money he'd repay after the collapse. The asymmetry was fatal. Wednesday, September 16, 1992. Black Wednesday. The war began at 8:30 a.m. Markets opened and the pound started falling. Soros was selling billions. The Bank of England bought pounds with reserves, trying to push the price up. By 9 a.m., $1 billion spent, still falling. By 10 a.m., another billion, still falling. At 10:30 a.m., Lamont made a desperate move. Interest rates from 10% to 12%. Theory: higher rates make pounds attractive. It didn't work. Traders saw desperation. The pound fell further. By 11 a.m., Britain announced rates would go to 15%. Economic catastrophe. Mortgages unpayable. Businesses bankrupt. The cure worse than the disease. Markets called the bluff immediately. Inside the Treasury, panic was setting in. Officials were running calculations on napkins. At this rate of spending, how long before we're bankrupt? The answer was terrifying. If the assault continued at current intensity, Britain would exhaust its entire foreign reserve by midnight. $44 billion, accumulated over decades, would be gone. The nation would be defenseless. Phone calls were made to Germany, begging the Bundesbank to lower interest rates, removing pressure on the pound. Germany refused. Their priority was controlling inflation, not saving Britain's political project. The United States was contacted. Could the Federal Reserve intervene? America declined. This was Europe's problem. Britain was alone, facing the combined might of the world's hedge funds and losing. By noon, Britain had spent $10 billion. The pound kept falling. Officials calculated, at current rates we'll exhaust reserves by tonight. Soros watched from New York. I felt no pressure. They were defending the indefensible. It was a one-way bet. By 4 p.m., Britain had spent $15 billion. By 6 p.m., the decision was made. Britain cannot win. At 7 p.m., Norman Lamont stood before cameras, voice barely steady. The government has concluded that Britain's best interests are served by suspending our membership in the ERM. The pound immediately collapsed 15%. Soros's borrowed pounds sold at 2.80 marks could now be bought at 2.40 marks. The difference, multiplied by $15 billion, was staggering. Soros's profit, $1 billion, in 24 hours. For British citizens, the cost was brutal. The $27 billion spent defending the pound was taxpayer money, $3.4 billion in actual losses. That's $540 per household, taken to defend a doomed policy. The government's reputation was destroyed. Britain was humiliated. But here's the twist. Within weeks, leaving the ERM proved the best thing for Britain's economy. Interest rates dropped from 10% to 6%. Lower rates meant cheaper mortgages, more investment. The devalued pound made exports competitive. By 1993, Britain was growing faster than Germany. By 1995, unemployment was falling. By 2000, Britain was experiencing its longest economic expansion in modern history. Economists later argued Soros had done Britain a favor. The ERM was strangling the economy. Forcing Britain out allowed the country to set monetary policy based on its own needs, not Germany's. But that's not how it felt September 16th. Soros became the most hated man in Britain. Newspapers called him an economic terrorist. The Sun ran headlines demanding his arrest. Conservative MP Nicholas Budgeon called him a gold-toothed vampire squid sucking the lifeblood from the British economy. Labour MPs demanded Britain ban currency speculation entirely. But Soros was untouchable. Currency speculation is legal. He hadn't done anything illegal. He'd simply recognized Britain was defending an unsustainable position. In his 1995 book, Soros wrote, "I'm blamed for the crisis, but I was participating in a market already broken. If I hadn't sold pounds, someone else would have." The crisis was inevitable. The Bank of England later admitted Soros was right. In documents released years later, officials acknowledged they'd warned the government in 1991 the rate was too high. They predicted exactly what happened. Politicians ignored them. Norman Lamont reflected, "We were defending the indefensible. Soros saw what we refused to admit. He was the messenger. We blamed him for the message." But this came too late for families who lost jobs, homes, and savings. Emma Richardson, a Manchester teacher, watched her pension fund collapse when British stocks plummeted after Black Wednesday. "I worked 30 years for that pension," she told reporters in 1993. "George Soros made $1 billion. I lost everything. Where's the justice?" This is the uncomfortable moral question. Was Soros a villain who destroyed economies for profit, or a hero who exposed bad policy? The answer is both. Soros didn't create Britain's problem. Politicians did. Soros simply bet reality would win. And it did. But Soros also profited massively from Britain's pain. The $1 billion came from taxpayers who spent $27 billion. Those billions could have been schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, transferred to hedge funds. Yes, Soros exposed flawed policy. But he got rich betting millions would suffer. The pattern repeated globally. In 1997, Soros attacked Asian currencies. Thailand's baht collapsed. Indonesia's rupiah fell 80%. Malaysia's prime minister called Soros a destroyer of 40 years of development. Soros's response? Malaysia's economy was built on unsustainable debt. The crisis was inevitable. I accelerated it. Technically true. But tell that to Indonesian workers who lost jobs. Thai families whose savings evaporated. The 1997 Asian financial crisis pushed 20 million people into poverty overnight. Soros made hundreds of millions. In 2008, Soros made $1.1 billion shorting U.S. housing. Again, he was right. But his profit came from collapse destroying millions of families. In 2016, Soros bet against the pound before Brexit, making hundreds of millions. In 2020, he shorted the dollar during COVID. At 94, he's still playing the same game. Since 2000, Soros has donated over $32 billion to charity through Open Society foundations. He funds democracy movements, human rights, education in 100-plus countries. He's given away more than he currently has. The man who broke the Bank of England now spends his fortune trying to make the world more open and democratic. Is this redemption, atonement, or billionaire PR? Critics say he's buying a legacy. Defenders say he's using profits from a broken system to fix it. The truth is probably both. The uncomfortable question: should we allow what Soros did? Should private citizens bet billions against national currencies? Should hedge funds force governments to change policies? Currency speculation punishes unsustainable policies. If Britain hadn't been forced out in 1992, it might have strangled its economy for years. Speculation forced a correction. But should George Soros personally have made $1 billion from that correction? There's no easy answer. Ban speculation, and you remove market signals. Regulate it heavily, and speculators move to unregulated markets. The fundamental problem: modern finance allows individuals to accumulate enough capital to challenge nation-states. Why do central banks fear Soros? Because he proved no amount of money can defend a flawed policy forever. Britain spent $27 billion and lost. The message: if your policy is unsustainable, speculators will find you. and they have unlimited capital to bet against you. In 2023, we saw this again. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. Credit Suisse failed. First Republic seized. Same pattern. Risky policies, vulnerabilities, speculators betting against them, spectacular collapse. And same response. Bail out the institutions. Ask taxpayers to absorb losses. Not a single executive criminally charged. The system Soros exploited in 1992 hasn't changed. If anything, it's worse. Compare Soros to Charles Mitchell, who crashed the economy in 1929. Both exploited broken systems. Both made fortunes while others suffered. But there's a difference. Mitchell created the broken system through fraud. Soros bet against systems others broke. Mitchell sold worthless securities to widows. Soros shorted an overvalued currency. Mitchell lied about risks. Soros correctly assessed them. The law sees them differently. But to the widow who lost everything in 1929 and the family who lost everything in 1992, does the distinction matter? Both walked away rich. Both left destruction behind. Today, Soros is 94 and retired from trading. When asked about Black Wednesday, he's unapologetic. I did what markets do. I found an inefficiency and exploited it. No one forced Britain to join the ERM at the wrong rate. They made bad decisions. I profited from their mistakes. That's how markets work. He's not wrong, but he's not entirely right either. Markets correct inefficiencies. But should one person be able to make $1 billion in a day betting against a country's currency? Somewhere right now, another George Soros sits in an office. He's studying currency pegs, analyzing sovereign debt, looking for the next Britain. He's building a position betting billions against some government. When his trade pays off, when the currency collapses, he'll make a fortune. People will lose jobs. Families will lose homes. A nation will be humiliated. But he'll explain he didn't cause the crisis, just accelerated it, that the policy was always unsustainable. He'll be right, and millions will suffer anyway, because that's what we learned from the man who broke the Bank of England. In finance, you can be right and ruthless simultaneously. You can profit from destruction and call it market efficiency. You can make $1 billion in a day, and it's not just legal. It's celebrated as genius. George Soros proved the system works exactly as designed. He just proved it in a way that made everyone uncomfortable with the design.